real transformation is it's about the people, from the people lens. It's about how people decides to show up differently, to work differently, to lead differently. That's what lead to the other breakthroughs and changes and new business models.
So welcome to the Shift Code. I have conversations with business leaders about transformation, innovation, leadership. And today, my guest, we're in San Francisco at the Masters of Scale Summit. My guest is Luisa Barraza, who is a VP at Pfizer, responsible for transformation, organizational change,
Yes,
people development, people experience.
that's right.
And you've spent over 20 years at Pfizer.
That's right.
Working in different areas, in marketing, in audit. You started as an engineer. You worked in all these different areas, and then you ended up working on transformation.
That's
So
right.
you've seen the company under so many different angles. You've covered systems, strategy, culture, and you have your PMP, you're a product professional
That's
yourself.
correct. That's right.
So I'd like today to explore with you a little bit about yourself, what you've learned along your career journey, how you've forged your own convictions about transformation, how you learned all of that, the method you use when you lead change. Then I'd like to shift, because I'm sure you will talk a lot about the need to adapt, agility, and, we have this big interest right now at PMI for enterprise agility. So I'd like us to talk about that. I'd like us to talk about AI, of course, how this is changing the workforce, how you think in the healthcare industry it will shape or reshape your work. And then maybe as the world is changing so much right now, how we see the next 10 to 20 years, and what our successors will have to face, the new generations of leaders. So hello, Luisa. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Pierre. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with yourself, right? Tell us a little bit, as an engineer, when you started, what you were expecting, and then what you learned along the way at Pfizer in your different roles that shaped your views of transformation, innovation, leadership, culture.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for having me. So yes, I started my educational background is as an engineer, industrial and systems engineer, and I like that area because it covers a little bit of everything, and then you can get into different types of industries and different types of roles, which is something that I was always very clear about what I wanted to do and what I did not want to do. And something I did not want to do was getting into these specific roles or getting a box on like a specific area. I did not want to specialize. So I actually wanted to cover different things. And many years ago, I don't think that was seen as very smart or very strategic or that I knew what I was doing, but I knew that that's where I wanted to go. So, and when people ask me, where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years, typical question. And I said, well, I don't know. And what type of role do you see yourself? And I said, I don't think that exists. And that has been true. The roles that I had throughout my career, many of them didn't exist when I started. So I didn't need to know about them. Actually, a couple of them, I created them because those roles did not exist.
But when you started as an engineer in a
So-
healthcare company,
Right.
what
So
were you
what
doing?
the way I started, it started in technology and not being a major in computer systems. So it was more about processes. So I was hired to redesign the technology processes within the organization in Mexico, where I'm from. And then from that, that grew into like, all right, let's do the same, but for different areas in the company. And from that, I just started taking different roles within technology, learning a little bit of everything. And I actually created a PMO organization for the region. It was Latin America, Africa, and Middle East. And then that's
How
when
did
I
you
got
did that? So you had that's when you got your PMP, or
that's what I was gonna say. That's what I
Okay.
got it.
Did it help you?
Throughout my career, it's a foundational certification, but also skills. Like anybody right now manages a project, right? So you should be able to manage or be able to master the foundations of project management. So absolutely, that was a long time ago, and it proved to me be very helpful and foundational in the work that I was doing. I had no idea how to create a new function on, there was a PMO function. So I did it because nobody wanted to do it. So I was the only one willing to learn how to do that. So that's what I did. Fast forward, that's the mindset that I always took is let's learn about this. And part of the role that I had, it was some sort of compliance role, and as well within the technology area, and that's what led me to audit. And because I
Financial audit or
financial audits and
financial audit.
technology audits, because I needed to learn. I reached out and I said, all right, can you show me what is it that you audit? What is it you're looking for? So I can, bring it back and apply it to the work that I'm doing. And through that work, I ended up working for audit. I wasn't an auditor. I got my certification in audit afterwards. But yeah, I ended up doing financial audits, healthcare compliance, and technology. But the audit work itself wasn't what I learned the most. What I learned the most is that type of job gave me the opportunity to travel all over the world, uh, see different parts of the company, right, from different markets, different regulations, different ways people worked, right, and gave me some insights. And whatever I was, whenever I was making a recommendation for the audit findings, it had to be practical and it had to be specific to the needs of that market, of that function. And that ability to do that analysis has been also very helpful in bringing into different roles within the company. After that, I did marketing. I did
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So you were in engineering, PMO,
yes,
audit, so a lot
technology,
of
audit.
processes,
It was very exactly
compliance, very
compliance
rational.
pros, very
And then
rational.
how did you end up in marketing?
Yeah, so in one of my roles, after audit, I went back to technology, but from a different perspective. I was a business partner to marketing in the medical function. So I got to learn how they worked, and I was basically the translator between their medical needs, marketing needs, and the technology needs.
Which I'm sure in a healthcare company is particularly interesting, right? Because you get all this regulation.
Exactly.
It's being a marketeer.
Because exactly, it's one of the financial industry and the healthcare industry is one of the
Most regulated.
most regulated. Exactly. So it forces you to be innovative, to think about different ways in which you can deliver solutions to your customers, your patients, and also to the people that work in the company. So yeah, it forces you to be to find different ways of doing things.
I'm a big believer that constraints don't reduce creativity, they actually foster creativity. Because the more constraints, the more innovative you have to be.
Yeah, I actually always tell people within the company is like, I think everybody should do a secondment. A secondment, we call it when it's like a temporary assignment in like different parts of the company. So I always tell people, everybody should do a secondment in an emerging market, because we always have very little budgets, small budgets, but they're asking us to do the same thing as you guys, like the bigger markets. And that's what, where innovation comes in, when like finding different ways to do, business, basically.
That's interesting. So what did you learn in marketing that was totally new for you? Like some aha moment that you realized, oh, that's a world that is completely unknown to me, and I'm learning something totally different, or maybe nothing.
No, I no, of course I did. So when I transitioned to marketing, it was because of that role that I play, a technology partner with marketing. So I got to learn their work, and what they were lacking was the structure, right? Because I was bringing the process mindset, and then I made a transition because I was already working with that team, and I was bringing a different perspective. So, but what I learned was exactly what you mentioned. So just to create a marketing strategy, that is in that case, I was part of a global team. It's global. It is a high level enough to be applicable to different parts of the world, but also flexible to be adapted to the local needs, because obviously we have different regulations in the market. So what I learned is that ability to go from strategic to tactical very quickly and deliver something that is able to to do just that.
Right.
That was my biggest learning.
So scaling something in spite of the local adaptations that you need to.
Exactly. So you don't start local, you don't start global. It's like, how do you make something that it's meaningful globally, but also can be adjusted locally? And that's not easy to do. And the other thing that I learned is that in marketing, you do a lot of market research, right?
Yep.
Before you make decisions, and it's part of the core.
Not always, but
right. Well,
it's
part of it.
recommended.
It's part of the core process of step, right? A basic step that you have to do marketing research in order to deliver a strategy that ended up doing a sale, right, on the product that you're selling. So that is
in the case of healthcare, it's mostly messaging research, right? So how do you position
right,
your drug?
But in our cases, with patients, with physicians,
Absolutely.
with
All the stakeholders.
healthcare institutions. So you bring that point of view and what resonates. So that was my first introduction to the people component of how we do business.
Like perception.
Yes, it was always there, but that was when I was like, okay, so there is a people component aspect that is very important to the work that we do. It's not all about systems and it's not about processes.
Absolutely.
Right?
As you may know, I spent myself 17 years in market research.
Uh-huh.
And so bringing this to project management is super important, right? Because we tend in project management to ignore the fact that in the end, perception is reality. And if you ignore it, then you can't get things done.
Right. And what do you learn about, the market research work that you did?
Yeah, but that in particular, that if you ignore perception, then no matter how smart you are, no matter how great your product is, no matter how right you may be, it's not going to take you very far. So when you run a project, when you lead a project, if you can't get the people to see the value that you're bringing, well, then you will be associated to failure.
Failure, right? And and so we're getting to a point where I'm very interested in that topic because that was the start of, again, me changing my perception about what's important and what elements are important to get right to be a success or to deliver a successful solution, project, and product.
So how did you move to transformation? Like, is it part of HR? Is it part of
where
do you sit?
Right. So it's a journey, right? And then we're a company that is always evolving and transforming.
Sure.
So so those areas did not exist before. From marketing, then I created a team. It was a small innovation team where we did a lot of human-centered design applied to marketing strategies and internal processes, not to products. And from there,
so what does it mean? What does it consist in? Human-centered design, right? Can you explain this?
Right. So you're designing a solution, a product, a process that is for humans. So it sounds very foundational and obvious, but I found that even the people that work with humans and do market research not necessarily take that lens or that approach internally.
So give us an example of, even without going into the details or disclosing things you don't want to disclose.
It's as simple as you're creating let's say you're selling a product, any product, and it goes to your customer, and then you create a marketing campaign, and right, so that it's gonna sell it. The human-centered design principles say that you start with a human perspective, and then you design that strategy or product that making sure that you meet the need of the person, of the human, that it's receiving that product or solution or is being impacted.
Yeah.
So many times, I'm not saying that it's all the time, but many times what happens is that you start creating something and then you launch it and you test it and then you iterate. But the human-centered design approach tells you is don't do any of that. First, just learn what is the need that you're meeting, what is the human need. And then you bring what is the business need and what is the feasibility of doing that. Most of the time, you start with the business need, well, we want to sell more. The feasibility, well, we have this technology that's going to help us to sell more to this person. You launch it, and then you see if they like it or not. In these cases, you don't do any of that. You identify what the human need is, and based on that, you find that intersection between business need, human need, and feasibility. And that's what's called the minimal viable product.
So in which part of the organization do you sit?
Right now is people experience, which is HR. From there, because I was doing
Because
a
it
lot
sounds
of
more commercial and product
I
related.
was
Yeah.
right. But because we were doing and applying that to internal processes and solutions,
Okay.
I ended up working a lot with the people experience team because we're creating experiences for our people, right?
Right.
And then that was a natural transition.
Like, for instance, onboarding processes or learning processes.
Yes, and
Yeah.
then I went into that. So we started testing it in marketing, and then the other parts of the company started seeing the value of applying that approach. And that's when I transitioned to people experience. At that time, it was called HR. And then that shows also the evolution of the thinking that is not about just HR, is people experience. We're creating experience for the people, right, that deliver
Yeah,
the
I'm sure it's a
solutions
big
that we're
challenge for a company that in healthcare, by definition, years before something is launched, is focusing on molecules
the
and
product itself.
science and products, and then get authorization to launch the product. And then the flexibility to adjust to people comes at the very late stage, right? Stage 4, whatever, very close to the launch, where it's more about fine-tuning the messaging, right? So this thinking of perception, managing stakeholders is probably something that culturally is difficult in a company like Pfizer.
Yeah, and any company, I would say, that is large and complex, right? In other industries as well. So I'm not saying that is just unique. That is a challenge unique to that
To healthcare.
to healthcare or a specific company. My point is that when we started applying this approach into internal processes, then people started seeing the value of not thinking about, all right, well, we create a process that's going to do step 1 and 2 and 3. We're creating an experience. And then based on that approach, then, okay, what is the process that is going to enable us to deliver that experience? And what is the technology that it's going to enable us to deliver that experience? So those elements come after.
Right. So
Right.
let's go to your method. You did mention MVPs. Do you apply agile methods in your way of transforming?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's a combination of human-centered design, agile, Google Sprint methodology, complex problem-solving frameworks. It's a combination of all of that. And it has been a journey for the company as well, and many companies, to embed that mindset and way of working in different parts of the company. So
Do you have like one way, or do you
no,
adapt?
it's different ways. You have to be agile because then you have to adapt it to the function, right? In how they're going to apply it. So no, it's flexible and it's not one way of doing things. And that's the I would say the key message, that it has to be flexible.
And so how do you define the method you will use to transform something?
The way I define it is, so transformation, for instance. So transformation, when you hear transformation, you talk about, or people talk about, we're transforming the way we do business, or we're bringing this new technology. Lately, it's AI, so we're transforming the way we work. But when I think about transformation, real transformation it's about the people, from the people lens. It's about how people decides to show up differently, to work differently, to lead differently. That's what lead to the other breakthroughs and changes and new business models, right? But it starts there with the people. That's how I think about transformation.
So let's pivot a little bit to agile applied to enterprise level, right? Because we know that agile originally came from software development, right?
That's
The
right.
Agile Manifesto was a sort of
12 principles.
yeah, exactly, that was built. It's a formalization of things that existed before, of course. But one day you had, I think, 17 authors, I know a few of them personally, who went to some ski resort in Salt Lake City and wrote down a very simple document that summarized how you do agile software development. Now, if you think about expanding this to the corporate level,
Yep.
so not just methodologies that came from agile, like Scrum, like all those ceremonies and how you transform software development itself, which, by the way, right now is completely, again, radically disrupted by AI. But you want to go to corporate agility. Most CEOs would say, I want my company to be more agile, right? What do you think they mean by that? Because usually they don't have any idea about Scrum, right? That's unless they came from software development themselves. So they talk about agility, but what do they mean?
In my experience, often what that means is go faster,
Right.
right? Now,
Or they usually mean like make sure you are closer to your external environment, right? And the ability to react
in
to
adapt,
external factors,
right, to the
but staying within strategy, right? That's the big but, right? Because it's not about doing whatever you want. It has to be within your strategy. How does it manifest itself at Pfizer? Do you talk about that? Corporate agility, enterprise agility?
Yes, absolutely. So going back to the manifesto, right, of agile is the way I approach it, and I have approached it in the work that I've done is we take those principles, right? So one of the principles is that change is expected. So you should expect change, right? So you have a plan. So everybody should expect that that plan is going to change. So there are no surprises,
So
right?
how does it work in a company that has cycles of 12 years, 15 years, right? From the moment when you discover the molecule or buy it, and then the moment it's going to go to market, it is so slow, so long.
Right, but you're saying, like how do you apply agile in a company like this? So it's not a one way to do it, right? So in the science space, it is seen in a different way. I mean, it's the nature of science, right? It's you test something, it doesn't work, then you try something else, it doesn't work. That's agile. You're iterating,
Yeah.
right? Now it takes long just because again the industry that we are is heavily regulated, right? But then if you take those principles into marketing, you take those principles into internal projects, which is mostly what I've been working on, just in the delivery of internal solutions. When you take those mindsets and those principles of agile, then yes, you're able to deliver faster, but not because you go faster from the beginning. It's because you quickly adapt. You see that if something is not working, an idea that is not, is not going to take you where you want to go, you kill it, and then you move on, and then you try something different.
So how do you actually do that? Do you have some governance mechanisms that allow you to reallocate resources, to stop things? Do you make the decision yourself, or
it varies. It's exactly so. It varies in different parts of the company, but yes, generally, we apply those mindsets and those principles in a way that okay, we have a goal and we are expecting things to change, and we're expecting to iterate. So very quickly, we put something to test, and if it's not working, we're not going to stay there. We're going to try something else and try something else. So when you apply that principle in different parts of the organization, that's how you then are able to make decisions and where to allocate resources. And that happens all the time. And not again, I've seen it in many other companies in the same industry as well. You see, drug, they lose exclusivity, so you have to adapt, right? So the resources are not going to that drug that becomes not generic. Now you're going to the new pipeline.
let's pivot a little bit to AI. How do you see AI affecting the healthcare industry to start with?
Well, it has for a while, so it's not. I'm not gonna say it's new to the healthcare industry. It just now we're talking about it more. But I've seen that being changing the way, for instance, patients communicate with physicians and how also physicians are able to provide a faster diagnosis to patients. So it's changing that relationship that at the end of the day is gonna have the outcome that we want in the healthcare industry, which is helping the more we can people to live longer and healthier lives.
Do you see patients adopting AI faster or physicians adopting AI faster?
I think it's a combination, and I don't think it's one or the other. We're all living in the same world where AI is changing the way we live. So, and even before AI, whenever you introduce a new technology to a set of, in this case, physicians or customers, there was always a learning curve, right? So now with AI, it's no different than any other technologies that we have used before in the past. The difference is that now it goes faster and it's changing faster than before. right? So where do I see in the future? I don't know what the future is, right? Same answer I said, like, where are you gonna, what are you gonna do in 10 years? I don't know. Maybe that type of job doesn't exist. So it's the same thing with AI. The type of cases in which we can use it, maybe those cases don't even exist.
What is the recipe to increase the value that AI brings? Like, where have you seen patterns in reasons why it's failing and patterns where it...
Good question, because the cases where we're seeing more successes is when people know how to use it, when they want to use it, right? And themselves, they see a benefit for the day to day,
Right.
right? So that's, again, the people component there.
Yes.
It starts with them.
To make their life easier, their jobs
Right.
easier,
It's not
faster.
about, here's an AI tool that you're going to use to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then you impose in it, and that's the theory of change management, right? Do you have a change, and you're introducing a new system, a new technology, in this case it's AI, and then you give it to them, and then you tell them, use it, and then you train them, right? When it's more successful is before any of that, you understand what is the need that you want to solve for that person or that group of people, and then you bring, okay, well, maybe this AI tool is going to help you test it, and you tell me if it's useful to you, right? It's not being imposed. And those are the cases where we're seeing more successes.
If we think about the impact of AI on the workforce, and as you've spent some time now working in the talent teams,
Yes.
what is your view on that? Like, how is it going to affect all different roles, like the junior roles, the middle managers, the more senior leadership? How do you feel this is going to play out?
From my perspective, I think it's forcing us to focus on more on the strategic aspect of the work that we do, right? From the people strategy perspective. It has been beneficial because you spend less time in processes and operations and doing things that are less valuable for the people that we're designing experiences for. So then that has been allowing us to be more strategic, to bring that human component to the conversations that we're having with leaders and teams, instead of spending most of our time and most of our team's time entering data and creating checklists and spreadsheets, right? With names on it.
Do you have some thinking about or perspective about the categories of employees in the workforce that would be the most affected? Like, people are scared right now. People who have kids out of college find it difficult for their children to find jobs, because we're seeing in some areas that recruitments are down a lot. Software development being a great example of that, where we're seeing a huge decline in recruitment of more junior software developers because of AI and the productivity that AI has brought. So we're also seeing many companies using AI transformation project to try and reduce the middle management layer that is often accused by most senior leaders to be an obstacle to agility and transformation and
creates bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. That's often a wrong perception, but that's the perception. What is your perspective on that? Like, who is going to be the most affected in a negative way?
I think, again, is my perspective. I think the type of roles that are going to be most impacted are the ones that are more operational and in less strategic. In the example of middle managers, typically they're not that strategic, they're not operational. Again, they're in the middle, and those are the type of roles, because then you have the people that can execute, and then you have the people that can create the vision and the path, right, where you want to go. So I'm not saying the specific type of role, is just the layer where they are. That middle management, I think you're going to see less of that.
And so if you're a middle manager, what is your solution? Like, how do you handle that? Because a lot of people are at that stage of their career. And
right. And we talk about this a lot, and it's about AI is now creating new opportunities, new jobs, right? New careers that did not exist before. So continuously learning and
That's right.
growing, that growth mindset is going to allow someone who is in that middle management, even like someone who's starting their career, That's the advice that we always give. Is like, just be curious, just be learning something new, so you have choices, and then you can offer different things and different perspectives.
Don't stay away from AI in the hope that it's not going to affect you, because that's a
No.
losing bet, right?
Exactly. It's like join, right? Join, learn, and learn how. And then I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in that journey of learning are gonna find themselves ways in which they can bring value, right, in a different way that they are working today.
Luisa, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world right now. So we're seeing a lot of disruptions. So AI, of course, is one of them, but there's also the rise of inequality. Like we're seeing many countries where there's a lot of division. Governments are tending to the extremes. We have this big movement of deglobalization. So how do you feel the next 10 to 20 years will look like for large corporations like Pfizer? How does this new environment affect the way large corporations will have to be led?
I don't think this is new. Again, as I mentioned before, I think that we're just going faster. The change feels like it's faster.
It still
right?
feels that there's a big disruption going on right
It
now.
is,
Right?
yeah.
In the last...
I'm not saying. I'm just saying that it's not very different from before. And then where I see companies is that you adapt or you die, right? So the ones who choose to pick up the pace, right, and make the hard choices, in able to stay in business and deliver the value that they want to deliver, they are going to have to continuously adapt. As I said, make the hard decisions, learn, right? And be willing to be wrong sometimes, be willing to lose some battles in order to stay in the competition.
But do you think for large corporations, this will mean being less efficient in a way than before? Because efficiency came from a very globalized economy. Now that we're more deglobalized, there's more certainty. Is the key to resilience to be less centralized? Maybe look for less efficiency, more autonomy. How do you feel? How do you think about that?
I think it depends on how you define efficiency. For me, efficiency actually is something that is going to help us. Being efficient for me is also finding different ways in which you operate right now, right, to do things faster, right? Take less steps, so you spend less resources on that process. So when companies choose to be efficient, right, I think that's when they are able to pick up that pace that I was talking about in delivering change and transform in the way they need to be to stay in competition.
But let's take the example. So you mentioned that you came from Mexico.
Yep.
Let's take the case of a country like Mexico, which benefited so much from the integration with the US in the last, I don't know, decades. So this is a new environment. For instance, what does it mean for Mexico as a country? Like, what is the adaptation that a country like Mexico or businesses in Mexico need to deal with?
It's forcing not only Mexico, but again, other countries to think differently and make different alliances, right? And look for partners where they did not have to look before, because, you had this ally and partnership for a long time. So there was no need to change.
Right. So in a way, you're increasing complexity to de-risk, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying that it's not complex. It's 100% more complex. But again, it is forcing you to adapt and find different ways in which you can still be successful, but with a different partner or different alliances or different ways of doing business.
Do you feel optimistic about the next 10 to 20 years?
100%.
Why?
Because of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the human component. Because you can, again, as I mentioned before, you can have the right technology, the right systems, and yes, it is disrupting, but I believe that the human component always wins. When we come together, right, and we have the same belief that something is right, that's when change starts, right? And that's what allows us to be ahead of that disruption and prevail.
That's about defining clear purpose and vision,
Exactly.
and then letting people find their ways through that.
And come together, because it doesn't take one person, it's together, right? So the human component, that's why I'm optimistic, because the human component is still there.
And you think the new generations, people who are at school right now, are being prepared for that?
I think so. I think that I've seen it in I have kids as well, so I see how they think about problems. They have an opinion on what's happening, and I didn't see that before in my generation, or with the people that I work with. That we thought about things the way they are thinking about it, because they are exposed to more information the way we did before.
So you're not too worried about, because many people worry about this excess of information, trying to cut their kids actually from seeing too much of what's going on and focus on learning the old school way. You feel almost the opposite.
It's about discerning as well, right? So it's you have to have a balance, right? You can't keep them away from the
TikTok.
world, what's happening in the world. Yeah, I mean, it's about providing the right guidance. So I'm feeling optimistic. I see the new generations. I see it in my company. The new generations that join, that bring many very good perspectives. That yes, sometimes it makes people uncomfortable because it's unknown, right? But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. So I am optimistic. Again, it's the human condition to adapt, to evolve, and to find ways to survive.
Luisa, I'd like to finish this discussion with playing a little bit of a game.
Yes.
So let's assume you are given full autonomy and empowerment by your CEO to increase the agility of Pfizer by, let's say, 10%, whatever that means, in the next 90 days. So what are the big things you will change? The things you will stop doing. You have all powers. You can decide whatever you want. The things you will stop doing, measure. How would that work?
In 90 days.
Yeah, I mean, you can take 100 days. It's fine. It's the idea that if you had a few things, if you had full empowerment, what would you decide to do? Like the few things that you think will really unlock more agility, more enterprise agility?
I would take it in a different direction, and I would even, if I could, ideally, I would just create my own company. I don't know what the industry is, but I would just create my own company, and that company built in the foundation of that the culture is that change is expected, right? That change doesn't feel like change. That feels like a natural evolution of the way we work. I will build it with people from different perspectives, bringing different perspectives, different generations. And again, you bring the right technology, the processes, etc. But it's the mindset that I would change completely. The mindset. I would actually eliminate the term change management completely and move it to change making. It's different because change management is reactive. It feels reactive to me. The change is here, you're just managing and catching up. Change making is you're shaping the change. It is expected, you're part of it, and you control the way it goes. And when it's here, you're excited about it.
That's fantastic news for product professionals. We call ourselves change makers.
Yes, exactly. And I think we should all do that. And not only call it yourself, but be one.
Absolutely.
Right?
Thank you, Luisa, so much
thank you
for this great piece of advice and for the time spent with us.
I loved it. Thank you so much for the invitation.